listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
Hey there, hope you're doing good, and thanks for checking out my show, Straight to Video. Today's guest is without doubt one of the most larger-than-life, strikingly original guys I've ever known in the music industry. From his one-of-a-kind image to a career that has covered so many different styles, and he's able to effortlessly adapt to multiple roles from singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and music producer. And that is seriously just scraping the surface. It's my absolute pleasure to have none other than Jean Beauvoir as my guest on today's Straight to Video podcast. Jean recently chatted to my friend and previous guest on this show, Todd Kearns, and Todd pretty much summed things up in his intro when it comes to talking to this legend. Simply, where do you start? We spoke for an hour and I barely got to talk about half the things I wanted to learn about. Now, for those unfamiliar, get your notepad ready and try and keep up. Jean rose to fame as bass player for the notorious punk rock band the Plasmatics before joining the band of mighty Stevie Van Zandt, or Little Steven as you may know him. Following that, offers would come along from the likes of Prince and Billy Idol to join their bands as bassist, but Jean would instead sign a record deal with Richard Branson back in the Virgin Record days and release his first solo album, Drums Along the Mohawk, in 1986. This album would spawn the hit single Feel the Heat from the Sylvester Stallone hit movie Cobra. Okay, deep breath. Along the way, Jean would continue to write and record his own material whilst also collaborating with KISS frontman Paul Stanley and help write songs for their album Asylum, and he would also go on to write and produce with legendary punk rockers the Ramones, which included their hit single Pet Sematary from the film of the same name. Other soundtracks, including the 80s horror Shocker, would feature Jean's talents, particularly on the title track, which was performed by the supergroup Dudes of Wrath, featuring the song's co-writer Desmond Child on vocals with Paul Stanley, Tommy Lee on drums, and Vivian Campbell of Def Leppard on guitar. Since then, Jean has gained fame with his band Crown of Thorns and continues to write and record his own solo material, as well as penning hits for the likes of NSYNC, Lordi, and has even had chart success within the massive world of K-pop. This guy is unstoppable. If you really want to dive into Jean Beauvoir's history and discography, then simply visit jeanbeauvoir.com, which is a great website with lots of great info, music and merch. It's a site so in-depth it deserves to be read with a couple of mugs of great coffee. So why not also pay our friends at Dead Skull Coffee a visit too, where you can grab 15% off any order by using the code STV on checkout when you order some of their amazing rock and roll coffee. We love those guys and appreciate them supporting this show. This really was a fun chat, and Jean was on great form and had some really great stories. We go in depth on his first experiences in the music business when he found himself out on tour before he'd even left school, and we learn of the first steps he took heading into New York and landing his slot with the Plasmatics. It's quite the journey, and what you're about to hear is just the beginning of it, but I'm sure you'll enjoy it as we dive into my straight-to-video chat with Jean Beauvoir.
My man. How you doing?
Good afternoon, sir. How's things?
I'm doing good. How about you? Where are you, first of all?
Just outside of Nottingham.
One of my favorite places over there. Oh, God. I miss that we don't get to go over there and hang out anymore.
It's crazy, right? And my mohawk's not looking as impressive as yours.
It's all right. It's the little brother.
Awesome. I was actually introduced to you through the very first Crown of Thorns album in the early 90s. Interestingly, I don't know if you remember the video for The Healer.
Yes.
The guy singing in the crowd towards the end.
Ah.
That was my friend who introduced me to you.
Okay. I say, what a small world.
I remember seeing it on Ed Banger's Ball. I was like, holy shit, that's my friend Steve.
It's a small world. Getting smaller every day, it appears. Yeah.
For sure. And it was amazing to see you guys opening for Bon Jovi and Van Halen at Wembley Stadium.
It was great for us, too. It was a great tour. For one thing, took great care of us. The audiences were fantastic. As you saw, we were getting, everybody was up, hands were up, the whole audience. I was like, I could get used to this. But it was a really great tour. It was fun touring with them, too, through Europe. It was great.
Had you crossed paths before with any of the Bon Jovi or Van Halen guys over the years?
I knew Johnny, well, pretty much the whole band for many years. I guess going back to 1982 even, because when I was working with Little Steven, Johnny was somehow affiliated with a studio called The Power Station over there. So you'd come in and all these people, Jimmy Iovine, all these other people used to always hang out there. So I met him around that time. And then my solo record came out and I met him again. And he really liked that solo record. He told me, oh, we play it on the bus every day and blah, blah, blah. I was like, great. And then we got closer and then it came to finally that point.
So you were born in Chicago, but you moved early on to like the New York, Queens area.
That's right.
Your family wanted to get out of there pretty fast.
Yes. They didn't like Queens. It was just, they just felt that culturally it was just different. My parents are from Haiti, and believe it or not, it's a fairly conservative upbringing in that country. Queens, you're already getting into fighting at bus stops and, people trying to steal your lunch money. And we were always, it was always trouble. You know what I mean? And my dad just said, no, this is not why I brought my kids to America. And so let's go someplace else. So we moved way out on Long Island, which was, I hate to say, it was like all white neighborhood. Not hate to say it, it was all white. There was no blacks anywhere to be found. And, and I moved out there. It was great. It took a little getting used to it because a lot of people way back then hadn't even seen black people. I hate to say it. It was that crazy. But my father just wanted us to have a good education and, and get the most out of America that we could. So by moving out there, it was a good move.
What brought your parents from Haiti in the first place to America?
I think all those islands, Haiti or whatever, they always have that American dream. You know what I mean? To get, Haiti is a pretty corrupt country. It's a beautiful country, but there are all kinds of problems in there, with the government and finances and on. So everybody's trying to get out of there, trying to get a degree. And, and Haitians, like I said, are pretty conservative. So a lot of times they either want to be doctors, all the kids, doctors, all parents are like, you're going to medical school. That's it. So it's always that or dentists or, something engineer as my dad was. And so that's what they were going for. And they actually met in Paris, I believe. It was in France. My mom was there with her sister who was married. He was at the time, he was the head of the UNESCO in Europe. UNESCO, United Nations. He was the managing director of that. So that's a very conservative side of my family. Ambassadors and really conservative people over there. So he met her there and somehow randomly, and they got married. Then they moved to America, moved to Canada before us, and then Chicago, and then started popping out little mohawks.
Amazing. But aren't you involved in Haiti with like some fundraising and stuff like that?
Yes, I do have a foundation called Beauvoir Haiti Foundation. We do just like particular initiatives. So when the earthquake happened at the time, we worked it out with another group called Clean the World. It's a company that actually collects all the soaps and toiletries out of the hotels that they throw out every day. You know what I mean? They put them in your room and then it's gone. Well, they get that from all these hotels around the country, and then they repurpose it, et cetera, and then create goods to be able to send to third world countries. So we did something with them where we had a whole big delivery thing down there during the earthquake and tried to help as we can. I also had a medical clinic down there for a while that unfortunately was destroyed in the earthquake, which was a shame. And then, so whenever I can be involved, and we have property there, we have people that work with us, and we try to help whenever we can down there.
Very, very cool. I know you started performing music at a pretty young age, but was music something you enjoyed as a fan that came along pretty early? Was you listening to the same music as your friends? Because you say it was a predominantly white area where you was growing up. So did that have an influence?
Yeah, it did, actually. Because when I got out there, everybody was listening to Led Zeppelin and KISS and, Steely Dan and those old 8-track recorders in the back of the Impalas. I remember it because I finally had one. But so it was, a different, sensibility. I always loved music. Ever since I was a little kid, I can remember parents would go to work and I'd be running around the living room with a broom, imitation with a microphone, when I was a little kid. And I was a drummer at first, so I'd stay home and play drums. And so I've liked playing, but I've always enjoyed good songs, good music. And I never really differentiated between, I only like rock, I only like R&B. I like everything. If I loved a great Michael Jackson song or Diana Ross came along, I'd be like, wow. And if it was Three Dog Night, that would be my song of the week. Whatever, Bachman Turner Overdrive, or whoever it might have been,
What were some of the first albums you really fell in love with?
Oh God, I would say we're probably talking Led Zeppelin. And ironically, my dad, which I actually didn't come to know till much, much later, was a great music fan. And he was from Haiti, conservative guy, engineer, you would never think. But every Sunday, he had this pretty good stereo system in the living room. And he'd make me come down, he'd say, come on down here, you bum, and listen to some good music. And all of a sudden, he'd put on Led Zeppelin, or he'd put on Janis Joplin. Then he'd put on ABBA. The next week, or he'll put on the Beatles' Magical Mystery. I can still remember the record, Magical Mystery Tour. He said, listen to the great music. Those guys, they know how to play. And it's and I was really and I realized later that everyone that he introduced me to as a kid ended up being legendary acts that are still massive today.
That's awesome that you kind of had that introduction. Perhaps if you weren't realizing it, but it was getting into your psyche.
That's right. He was actually. It's interesting, you'd never think,
So your first instruments was it drums then bass? Is that right?
I started with drums. I liked that. I enjoyed playing drums. So that was the first thing. I got my first drum set out of my room and I just practiced the records and played the records. And then I ended up pretty early on, we're talking 13, I had a teacher. He was a drummer. He had opened for the Who once. He's a teacher that wishes he was still playing rock and roll. He said, we talked about it. He said, what if we start like a junior high school rock band? Like something after school where anybody who's interested in whatever, singing, keyboards, guitar, bass, they can just join. We can have 3 singers, 2 this, 3 of that, whoever we want. And we'd play at school functions and do things like that. So it was a great program. And I started as the drummer. And at the same time, my brother had a bass that he just had laying around. I would just go in his room, take it, and I started messing around with bass. And before you knew it, I was playing bass. So in that band that we have, I found myself going, okay, I'm the drummer, till my father one day didn't like drums anymore. And he kicked the drums out of the house, down the stairs, out the front door. And I never saw a drum set again, at least nowhere near my house. I said, well, I better move to bass now. So playing my brother's bass, I got better. And in that band, I would switch. If we needed a drum, I played drums, and I was singing at the time. I always sang. So I was a singing drummer or a singing bass player. And then I added keyboards, added guitar, and that's it. And it just kept going.
How did you take to bass? Because I'm a bass player as well, but it took me a while to kind of get my ears synced to, I can hear the bass lines straight away now when I zone in on songs. But I guess a lot of 70s records, the bass was very prominent. I
have a pretty keen ear. I've been fortunate that way. I don't know what it is. I can really hear detail, really can hear detail. I've always had that. So even when I started, I could hear the bass lines right away, which is what intrigued me. I'd hear these fantastic bass lines and I'd say, wow, that's something I want to learn to do that. You know what I mean? And bass is a really interesting instrument. I find myself now, I listen to a lot of music and I find myself, let's say you listen to the Motown, those bass lines are just fantastic. Like we talked about before, it kind of something that you add to your mental Rolodex again. So even when I joined the Plasmatics, I found myself incorporating a lot of that kind of bass playing with the speed of punk, you know what I mean? Which wasn't always so easy, but you know what I'm saying? It was fun, challenging.
And the band which you was playing in because I think you've called it a School of Rock. Was this a band which kind of went out and did shows?
Yeah, it evolved to that. So we started doing, just the club shows and everything. I mean, not the club shows, the school shows and everything. And after a while, yeah, you're like, we can't just do this. You got to get out and play. So summer comes and I started booking gigs at, some local clubs, and I called the band Topaz. So we'd play, a pub, and then it became a nightclub, and then it got to be bigger clubs. And I started getting other guys from outside of the school to join, to the point where it was me, but then I'd have a keyboard player who was 23 that did something else. I'd have, a guitar player who was older, actually. Yeah, that's it. I don't think any of the guys from school, no, only one. There's a great keyboard player named Henry Weber who passed away not too long ago. He still played on some great things. He played with Little Steven too, finally. I'd introduced him to him, but he was a great keyboard player. He went on to do stuff as things evolved.
Did you like taking the reins? It sounds like you was quite pretty much the leader of the band, booking the shows and stuff like that. Did you enjoy that role?
I think so. I think it's just something that came natural to me. And, I was ambitious and always wanted to get things done. And I always wanted to get more things done. I don't think I've really changed that much. But where that actually really came into play is right after the school stuff I'm talking about. I was 14 that summer, would have turned 15. And a manager comes over and he says, "Hey, what's happening?" I manage a guy named Gary U.S. Bonds. I wasn't really aware at the time. He said, "Yeah, he had a great hit called 2:45 to 3 in the 60s. He does all these things. He's looking for a band. Are you interested?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he asked me how old I was. I said, 18. And he said, "Okay, well, let's, I'll give you the address. Why don't you come to Gary's house this weekend and let's see what happens. I think you guys are great. Wonderful." We went. I met Gary U.S. Bonds. I don't know if you know who he is. He had another hit called "This Little Girl Is Mine" that Bruce Springsteen produced much later.
Everything comes kind of full circle.
That's right. Yeah, so he takes it. He says, "Okay, I love it. Okay." And he called me Boo Boo at the time. That was his nickname. So he was like, "Okay, Boo Boo, that's it. I don't rehearse. I don't do this. Meet me in Florida. I'll send you the dates. I'll send you the address. This is what the deal is." He worked out money and everything. He says, "Good luck. I'll see you there. Just make sure you have it all together."
So was he wanting Topaz as the backing band?
Exactly. That's pretty much what it was. Even though it was, he had at that time, he already had, he might have had one person already that he added. I don't really remember exactly. There's somebody that he might have added to the mix that he knew. But that was it. Topaz would be the backing band for a while. And then it evolved from there where, because then he found out my age that year. Called me to a hotel one day and he tells me, "Hey, boo, we got to talk." I said, "What's going on?" He said, "I spoke to your mom and you're going back to school." And I was like, "Oh, I don't want to go to school. This is rock star to me." As foolish as you are, you know what I mean?
You'd already been bitten by the touring bug. You loved it.
That's right. I was like, "What?" And he said, no, you're going back to school and we're going to just work things out that way. And he actually did. I went back to school, and being that he was a star from that era, all the teachers knew him. Everybody knew him. So he'd call up and say, "Hey, I need Boo Boo from Thursday to Friday." So they'd be like, "Oh, great, Gary." And I'd get off and he'd actually fly me to Playboy Club in Chicago. I'd go play Vegas. I'd go play this. And some of the other guys couldn't do that. So it evolved to having other guys that he had or people that he knew or people that I brought into the band with me. But I was always the musical director of it, nevertheless. It was crazy.
Did you like that responsibility at such a young age then? Did you ever feel pressure?
Yeah, I felt pressure. No doubt. I mean, and of course, guys hated me and everything, at least for a bit, until things came together. As a matter of fact, I can remember one time we were going to Bermuda, and we had a rehearsal that I had called. It was the second band he had me bring in, and he called me back to come play with him. We took a little hiatus, and then he said, "Boo Boo, I got some new guys. You got to come get this together." I said, "Okay." Came back in, and we got there. I called the rehearsal for let's say it's 3:00. Nobody shows up. Everybody's at the beach. It's everywhere they want to be. And so they come back and I'm like, "That's it, disrespect, blah, blah, blah." And of course, they're looking at me like, "This kid, we're going to kill this kid." And I told them docking everybody, $500. They wanted to jump me. And then one of the guys there, a guitar player, all of a sudden said, "You know what? He's right. We were supposed to do this," and da-da-da-da. And then we kind of teamed up. That ended up being this guy, Tommy Lafferty, who I've played with through all the Crown of Thorns records, Jean Beauvoir solo records, everything, who I brought back into the fold when I got my first solo deal.
How were your parents feeling about this? Because I know eventually it didn't go down very well.
Right in the middle of all of this, we're talking probably the year after my dad kicked me out of the house. At first, he liked it. He liked, that you're an entrepreneur, and I had already my own PA system. I think at that point I had my own truck. It's like, it's a little business. he didn't like the fact that I was out playing every night, coming home at 4:00 in the morning, and then, going to school like this. And one day he just said, I thought about it, and it's not working. He said, so as of tomorrow, I don't want to see any instruments in this house. He said, so it's the choice. Either the instruments go or you go. And that was it.
Do you think he was calling your bluff?
Maybe. I was gone. Didn't see him again until my first solo record, which was probably, 10 years?
Did you guys kind of make up, though?
We made up later. It was around the solo record time that I actually, called him, and I said, I got to make up with my dad. This has been too long now. I called him and invited him. And of course, he wanted to show off a little bit to show that something actually did happen. So you call him after the hit. And so, I had him come, set the limo and this, security, everything, the whole trip. And then he comes and he was impressed, of course. And then he's just started saying, I apologize. He apologized. He said, I'm really sorry. He said, I would have never imagined that you could make anything like this happen. Little kid way out Long Island, KISS posters on your wall saying you want to be a rock star. I mean, come on, that's pretty far-fetched. And I just didn't want to see you end up being a musician playing in the subway for the rest of your life. And I understood that. So we actually made up and became close friends from that point on.
I'm interested. You're getting all this amazing experience at such a crazy young age. Had you had the opportunity to actually go and see bands as a fan?
Funny you asked that, because not much. I saw KISS, I remember. I saw James Brown. My brother took me to go see. That's another amazing talent, by the way. But so I didn't see a lot of bands, to be honest. I'm trying to think. We had a place called Nassau Coliseum out there that did have all the major groups coming through. So I'd go do that every once in a while, but it wasn't the same. I wasn't connected with at the time. You know what I mean? So it's like, it wasn't as easy. So I didn't go out that much to see. I wasn't like a concert goer.
What was your first KISS show?
Oh God, I've got to remember. This has got to be, I can only guess it was probably around, I think was Madison Square Garden. And that must've been around 76 or 77. I'd have to look back at the exact dates, but it must be in that area.
Was your mind blown?
Absolutely. I had KISS posters on my wall. My relatives would come from Haiti. My grandmother wouldn't come in my room because she said, Gene Simmons is the devil. And it's pretty, interesting that years later you find yourself writing songs and playing bass,
Not to put you on the spot, though, who was your favorite member of KISS back then?
I'm not going to say that. It was always rough because it was obviously between Paul and Gene, because I loved how extreme Gene was in his ways. And I really felt that Paul was a great front man. It was just like this whole thing, it was just great. That's why they're KISS. That's why they're as big as they are.
For sure. And then you got the opportunity to join the doo-wop group, the Flamingos.
Yes.
How did that come about?
That came from the whole Gary U.S. Bonds thing, because there was a whole oldies circuit that was going around America. And with Gary, we did all the Dick Clark shows. So it was a massive tour of the U.S. I'm talking coliseums playing everywhere, where they'd have, the Platters, this and all the Gary U.S. Bonds, Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry, it was full Dick Clark reviews. As a matter of fact, there were times sometimes where these guys' bands wouldn't show up. And Gary would come and just would say, boo boo, you got Bo Diddley tonight. I'm like, what?
For real?
I'm serious. The next thing you know, you got your guys there, you're calling out chords to people in the middle of the show. A lot of times their stuff wasn't that difficult, but it was some pressure sometimes. But they're that way, those guys. They're really casual about things, So, okay, so back to the Flamingos. So as far as from doing all of that, I met the guys from the Flamingos. And somehow they had just, they said, looking for another singer. They just approached me, and I actually went and did an audition with them one day and said, perfect. And then they just hired me, and I became one of those 4 singers with Jake and Zeke Carey. That was a great experience too. The harmonies, learning all those harmonies and singing in Vegas where you're crooning, I only have eyes for you.
How was your Vegas experience? Because you wouldn't have been 21 by then, right?
No, I wasn't 21 yet, because I joined the Plasmatics at 19. So I was still 16, 17 at this point. I was their youngest ever member. Let's put it that way.
Did you have like the greatest fake ID ever?
Exactly. When you're in the band and stuff, you can get away with all kinds of stuff. You're always going in back. That is your. But yeah, I probably did actually. It was really a lot of fun, and the way I look at it, it's almost like it added something to more stuff to your mental Rolodex, and it's just great life experience.
And it's stuff you perhaps call on which you don't realize you're doing.
You're right. You can be doing background vocals with Crown of Thorns, and all of a sudden you'll find yourself putting some kind of interesting little line, subliminal whatever, some kind of interesting background part. And you can feel that it's coming from something completely different.
So what was your very first experiences of Manhattan and the punk scene? Because you had like a crazy thing happen, like your apartment burnt down, right? That was kind of like a left turn for you.
After I did all that doo-wop stuff and everything, still lived in New York till the end of school. And then I ended up taking a short move to New Jersey. I joined a cover band at the time, and I was still doing some stuff with the Flamingos. And Gary would call me in and out to go do things.
You're a working musician.
Yeah, exactly. I was a working musician. And I was actually starting to think, maybe I should go to college and get a degree on this. You was starting to think, trying to be logical. Didn't work. And so I think somebody else kind of made the decisions for me, because one day I came back to this apartment I had in Jersey and the building's burnt down and there's nothing. And I go to try to walk into the front door and see, well, my stuff's up there. Everything's up there. He says, there's nothing up there anymore. It's over. And then he says, they're giving out, $100, $120 checks at the city, hall or whatever it was for compensation. I'm sorry. And that was it. Everything was gone. So I found myself on the street with nothing. And I'm like, uh-oh, what am I going to do now? And I went and got my money and, bought a shot motorcycle jacket, to be honest with you. Great use of the money.
Got to keep warm in New York.
That's right. So I got that. And then that's it. And I started looking around the scene in New York, looking at the Village Voice, I believe, which was the paper at the time that's where everything was happening. It was a little band looking for somebody. And I saw an ad for a band called NYN, which actually meant New York Niggers, to be honest with you. And I called them and they said, yeah, come on down. They rehearsed in like a really seedy little loft, not even a loft. It was like a basement of a tunnel it was really like New York. The Lower East Side back in those days, whole different animal. It was rough.
Well, you had the jacket, so you was fine.
I had the jacket, so I fit in. You see, I was thinking. I wanted to make sure I could fit in. And then I started playing with them. And our first show was at a place called My Father's Place on Long Island. And we were opening for a band that was kind of just up and coming called the Plasmatics.
What did you make of that show, seeing them? What did it have, like the theatrical, chaotic element to it?
Some of it, but it wasn't a huge club, so it didn't have everything, But it was wild enough for you to go, this is crazy. It's like really wild. And so we opened for them, and then we ended up talking. I was talking to the guys in the band, Richie, the manager, Rod, everybody. And then it turns out a couple of weeks later, an ad comes out, Plasmatics looking for a bass player. I said, hey, here's that band. I called, spoke to the manager. He was like, yeah, I remember you, blah, blah, blah. We're auditioning. Why don't you come do it? So we set a date. And there were a lot of people auditioning at the time. It was funny. The subway had all these guys with basses, going to audition for this band. And I wasn't really that aware, but a buzz was starting, in New York with this band. And then finally, after a couple of months back and forth and everything, he finally called me and said, okay, if you want the gig, it's yours. But it's not going to be easy because for the first year, pretty much, you're not going to make any money. We're not going to do anything. Everything goes back into the band. You got to think about if you can handle that.
Was there a signed band at this point?
No, there was nothing. So all the money was coming in from live shows. And basically, all the records were independent at that point. They were just and so everything was being funded pretty much from the live shows, which were starting to make some noise. It was still clubs, but it was starting to go. And so I took the jump. I said, why not? And suffered for the first year, living on streets, bad motels, maybe friends' place. I mean, it was tough for a while. And then the rest is history. Then the band got more famous. The year passed. And then, things just got better.
Tough but exciting.
Exactly. Tough but exciting.
You've spoken how their music was often overlooked because of the overtop stage show, but you said there are a lot of intricate parts to the songs, particularly the drums and bass. Was that something you brought to the table once you joined?
In part, I would say, yeah. I'm not trying to brag or anything, but in part, yeah, because the way I played bass was very different than a lot of the punk bass players. So I don't know if you listen to Plasmatic records, but if you listen to songs like Master Plan or these songs, I listened to it the other day. First of all, I didn't realize how loud the bass was. It's the only thing you hear, that thing is blaring. But the parts were really, I guess I must have been doing some interesting stuff. And I really liked working with the drummer. I already had a pretty good experience, with O'Garius Bonds and actually somebody else I'd worked with. This is another interesting story. Somebody who produced me, but I was young and stubborn. It's a guy named Rob Parisi at the time who wrote and sang the song, Play That Funky Music. That was my first producer. And that was at 15. He took me in the studio We worked on a couple of things, and I had all these opinions and everything. So the manager calls me in one day and he says, "Hey, John," he's one of these big New York managers. "Sit down over there for a second." I sat down. And he's like, "You see those gold platinum records on my wall?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Do you have any?" I said, "No." "Then shut the fuck up."
Was you there with like big miserable face?
Exactly. I can remember that. I'll never forget that conversation. He was just so matter of fact about it. He said, "This guy's got lots of experience. Is that a hit?" Funny thing about it is that hit is still now, 30, 40 years later, probably the biggest hit. I hear that song more than anything, any song I've heard. All these years after, it's almost like it's haunting you. But anyway, so that was another little experience in that mix of things. So I lost my. So where were we at right before that?
Well, we're talking about your bass parts and stuff on the Plasmatics song.
Oh yeah, so the bass parts. So they were, they were pretty intricate, and like I said, and I enjoyed that with the bass player. Stu Deutsch, the original drummer from the Plasmatics, was a really great drummer. Different style, But to tell you the truth, from the time he left the band, we could never find another drummer. We auditioned all kinds of guys who could do the 16ths in the way that he could. Because when Plasmatics would start, it was like a freight train and things are blowing up and smoke everywhere and slipping and dry ice. You're like helmets. It's a mess. And things are just going like full speed, and it's just like, it's such a rush to be on that stage when this is happening. And he just had this thing and he just kept that beat all the way. And we had to keep that speed going for the whole show. It was exhausting. It's exhausting. But yeah, people should sometimes go back and look at some of that stuff. Playing punk, I always say to people, is a lot more intricate than people think. A lot of people can't do it. A lot of great metal players cannot play a simple punk song because they're so used to the consistency of the strum, or they do everything up and down, or they do this, that in punk, you just have to go, first of all, it's all downstrokes, and it's not consistent. It's a matter of knowing where to put certain accents, and that's all comes from feel. It's not something that you can write down, accent on 3, on 5, on 7. You know what I'm saying, right? It's like, but why is it there? Why? And everybody, what you would say, the school musicians, always want to define everything and play this. But wait a minute, is it this, John? Is that up and down, or is it on the? Say, no, it's none of that. It's just,
I don't know. You just got to feel it. That's the stuff you cannot be taught.
You can't be taught. It's either you feel it or you don't. So that's why I always found that to be really interesting. And I think that all genres have really interesting things to bring to the mix. I'd love to go see, wow, that's great in that classical piece. Or that's great in that punk song. Oh, wow, that's what it's all about, right?
I'm interested to know that during all this time, if there was anyone or anything that inspired you to be such an individual with your identity, your image, choices of music. Because you said that there was a fair bit of backlash for you early on in New York. A black guy playing punk rock and rock music, then throw in a blonde mohawk as well.
You're right. You're 100% right. That's a good question, because I don't think I've ever addressed that. Where did it really come from? I don't know. Maybe it's just a combination of just elements of how I was brought up, the friends that I had, the different, everything, Haitians, the voodoo thing that pretty much exists in my family. It's very individual. I think people in my family, my father, my uncles, voodoo priest and this, they were kind of individuals in a lot of ways. So it's almost like I kind of looked at it like, that's your role in life, is to bring certain things and to open certain doors for people to be able to do things that, they wouldn't attempt to do on their own. You mentioned the mohawk, I remember early on, I'd get chastised by blacks on the street. How dare you have blonde hair? It's going against our roots. That's the hair of our keepers. And I'd hear every story.
So you were getting it from like both barrels.
Oh yeah, well, more from the blacks, to be honest. And it was like crazy. I couldn't go to Times Square, New York. I go to a movie, guys would be getting up, the whole theater, people are screaming things, making fun, laughing. I went through this for years.
Wow.
It was tough.
I guess in your heart, you knew you were being true to yourself.
That's right. Yeah.
I heard, like you said, you saw differences in the audience at Plasmatic shows. It kind of opened it up to different people coming in, which is amazing.
I kind of look at it like this. This is what you were meant to do. You had a job. Your job, you were given certain talents and gifts that maybe go beyond some other things, but you have to use them in a certain way.
Awesome. I love it. And you wanted to move on in your career from the Plasmatics and you quit the band. Was it around 1984?
Probably around 1982, 83, actually. I did a couple of other things here and there, but yeah, around that time. That's when I joined Little Steven.
Didn't David Lee Roth kind of give you a bit of a push?
Yes, he did. And yeah, he didn't tell me quit the band and go, but we went out one night. He came to a Plasmatic show. And the security guy came over and said, there's a band out in the parking lot, and this guy's Van Halen. I knew them because like I said, I listened to everything. So I knew that really got me and all that stuff. I was a fan. And so I said, yeah, let them in. They come in, everything, and say hello to everybody. And David kind of hung with me while we hit it off. I still have a picture of us in the dressing room at that Plasmatic show. I still have it now. It's funny. And then he said, I'm going to be watching the show. He said, listen, let me take you out after the show. I said, great. And he says, he had like its old Mercedes. We used to collect Mercedes. And so he takes me out. We go to some local clubs. We're hanging around. We're talking. And then he kind of said to me, oh, man, you guys are making so much money. I can't believe it. He said, because he saw, we were doing something like 5 nights at Perkins Palace and this many nights at Santa Monica Civic, because we did things differently. We wouldn't play one big hall because the manager wanted to spread things out to create that buzz. So by doing 10 nights at the Whiskey, then moving just a little further and doing Perkins for 5, let's say you do something like that, you can create 10 days of Plasmatics mania in the city. And that has a lot more effect than going to play the 50,000 seats tonight and you're gone tomorrow. And nobody knew you were there except for those people, So it's pretty smart when it came to that kind of stuff. So David took me and he said, you're making all this money, everything. And he looked at me and he said, you don't know what I'm talking about, do you? And I was kind of like, like that look, like, and he said, you should quit. He said, forget it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should just go do your own thing. That's pretty much what it was. And it wasn't just him, and it was that. And also I was having some issues with the management. They wanted us to sign some new contracts that I knew were not anything I even think of signing. Anyways, and the ones who did, unfortunately, ended up in years of hell. I was trying to help them not to get themselves into trouble like this. But so it just had come to the end of the time. And I was ready. I always wanted to be a solo artist. I always wanted to do my own thing. So I always looked at that anyways as just a step.
Over that next couple of years, so much was happening around that time for you. I mean, you had the stuff with Prince calling you saying, you got to be in my band, you got to be in my band. You was trying to get Billy Idol a bass player, even though you could totally handle the job.
That's right. Oh, you read this stuff. That's right. I remember we were just hanging out, Billy, Steve, and I, because we knew each other for a long time. And they were saying, we got to find you great. They said, why don't you just do it? I was really stubborn about it to everybody. I was like, I want to do my solo thing. I was like with blinders. And then the only one who actually managed to make me move was Steven.
But he had like a way of wording it to like get you some more cred.
That's right. Exactly. That's right. Get you some more cred. And he was right.
How was your first interaction with Little Steven? Did you two both hit it off pretty well straight away?
Yeah, we did. Here it goes where it goes around again. That same manager who found me at 14 was still Gary Usman's manager. So at this point where I'm leaving the Plasmatics, of course, you start calling people that you know for whatever reason, just like, hey, what's happening? Oh, I just left, blah, blah, blah. Well, it turns out that John Apostle, this manager, had just made a deal with Steven and Bruce Springsteen to produce that new record, This Little Girl Was Mine. So at that point, John said, you know what? I think you'd really hit it off with this guy, Little Steven. I know you haven't met him, but you two are going to hit it off. I'm going to work it out where maybe they do rehearsals or something. Because at that point, I had gotten a loft, like right in the middle of the city, at 30th Street, in the clothing district. It was one of those musicians' lofts where, you build the fixtures inside, you bring in your own stuff. It's just like a big 3,000 square foot loft. It was pretty big. And I had a separate room that was a rehearsal studio. That's where I do all my rehearsing and recording. And it wasn't a recording studio at that time. It was mostly rehearsal. And I used to rent it out to other musicians. He said, we'll do pre-production here. So, and then you get to meet Steven, you guys talk and see what happens. And that's exactly what happened. I met Steven, we started talking. I played him some stuff and he said to me, I love this stuff. He said, but you're not going to get a deal because, you come from the Plasmatics and, they just think that all you know how to do is blow up things. So at this point, I'd suggest I'm taking a couple of years off from Springsteen and I've got this new project. Why don't you come on board with me? Do a couple of years with me. Let's make a couple of records, go on tour, do whatever. And then after you've done this, people will clearly see who you are.
That's why he's a good businessman.
That's right. It made a lot of sense.
But then you had the Prince calls, but you also met Paul Stanley around this time as well.
That's right.
Something inside you must have thought, I'm doing something right here.
Yeah, I guess so. There was some action happening, but it's not always as glamorous as you think, because you leave the Plasmatics, you don't know where you're going. So you got your apartment, you got bills, you got this and that. And like you said, you're a musician in New York. It's like, well, what am I going to do now? I'm not getting a record deal, obviously. So you could be back in the street in 6 months, You know what I mean? It doesn't take long. And then all of a sudden, I had the Prince offer, that's true, but I didn't even think about that. I'm writing a book right now, and a lot of this is going to be in this. I probably looked at things differently at the time. I thought, he's probably just trying to knock the competition out, so I can't do that, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to be known as that. I want to be this. And so you think about all these things. So it wasn't even something I considered, even though he had offered not only to play in his band, but also a solo deal that he would produce the record. But, you worry. You think, I'm just producing and leaving on the shelf for the next 10 years. You know what I mean? It's like, so you're like, you're weary about everything, especially at a time where music in America there was so much racism in radio that, certain guys, there was only one that would get in at a time, I hate to say, like a Prince, Lenny Kravitz, me, a certain look, a little rock aspect. No, they didn't let too many of those in, like one. If it's Prince, that's it. If it's, Michael Jackson wasn't even getting on MTV.
That's weird now, because after a while, if somebody hit, so many other labels would be clamoring to get an identical version of that.
That's exactly what happens. Nobody wants it until it happens. Then when it happens, everybody wants one. It's good. Well, whatever it might be. You noticed it. Aha came out. I remember they had a huge hit from Norway back in those days. Next thing you know, half the USA&R guys were all in Norway. It's crazy how the industry works.
Because you and Paul struck up a good songwriting relationship as well, which is still kind of going on to this day, because you did the recent song, A Beat of the Honey with Lordi.
I know, right? It's crazy.
Is that an old song or a song which was written in an 80s vibe?
We wrote it in 89. Lordi approached me. I had gone to, I was in Finland doing, I think it was a KISS exhibition. And basically, I'm sitting out there, and this band, Lordi, had been trying to reach me. We had gone back and forth for, I think, 4 years about co-writing. There was a guy named Darren. He was the one who introduced us. He said, you guys should get together. 4 years of emailing back and forth, and we never get it together. Finally, I'm over there. So I go, and we start writing. We wrote 7 songs in 2 days together, or 2-3 days. It was amazing. We just had this, working relationship. As soon as you walked into the room, I could see them, feel them, and hear things would just be popping in my head. And it worked out well. And then they told me about the album that they were doing. They had this concept of, what if we had a hit in 78? What would it sound like? What engineers would we have used? What mics would we have used? And then 81 and 85 and so on. And they said, so we're going to make a record like that. What do you have? You have anything maybe for those years? I said, I've got the perfect song. I said, something that Paul and I wrote back in the day, I think will fit right into that slot. And then I played for them. They liked it. Next thing you know, it comes out, and the single comes out, does well. And the album goes to #1 in some countries. I'm like, wow.
It's got the amazing line, got to dip into your fruit jar.
You like
Now, I got to ask, is that your line or is it Paul's?
I'm not sure who, but I know it's something that sounds very familiar to Paul and I. That's a kind of thing that we'd probably get a kick out of if we were saying it. You say, dip into your fruit jar. That's it.
Incredible.
You know what I mean.
So what was Paul's reaction to you saying, I pulled this old song out of the archive? Was he aware that it got a cut on this new album?
Yeah, absolutely. He was happy because I had to get his approval. So I called him and I said, I've got the strangest thing. And he said, that sounds great. Let's go for it. Because at least the way they announced it, it seems like that may have been the only song that Paul had written, released, that was not earmarked for either a solo record, a KISS record, or something specific. We wrote that song at a time period where Paul and I just decided to just do some writing that had nothing to do with, it wasn't for KISS, it wasn't for that, it was just our catalogs. Because, I do a lot of that. I write songs for Korea, for this, NSYNC, And so he kind of liked that. He's like, let's just write some things that could maybe just be covered by other people. So yeah, this was one that hadn't been covered yet. It was just sitting there. And so he was happy. He liked it. Sent him a little check. He was like, yeah, I'm going to buy a house now.
I want to touch on a little bit on your movie soundtrack stuff. You finally got the chance to release your solo album, Drums Along the Mohawk, which already had the song Feel the Heat. I think it was going to be the lead single, right? Another crazy chance occurrence, Sylvester Stallone sees an early edit of the video, and wants it as like the song to be in his new film Cobra and the main track to spearhead all the publicity. That's just one of those things that, I mean, he could have seen a different video, or it's just mad.
And that could determine the course of your whole life. It's really strange. You know, you end up talking to friends about this kind of stuff. I think I was saying this to somebody just a couple of days ago, that I've almost come to a point where I let the spirits or whoever it is almost make some decisions. You know, it gets to the point where you say, I can't figure this out. How am I going to, because, you know, you're always trying to figure everything out. How am I going to get my record out? How am I going to get the record out? How am I going to do this? You always want to have the solution, the end result. But sometimes you just can't get there. And, you know, it comes, so I almost look at it, sometimes you just got to let go and just say, you figure it out for me, because I'm at a loss. I think it was almost something like that with the whole thing with Mary Lambert and Stallone. And think about the chance that he would have walked into that studio just when she's editing that video. Otherwise, that wouldn't happen. Who knows what would happen?
It's like, I've just seen this amazing video. Get Survivor on the phone. They ain't got a song on this soundtrack.
That's it. It's crazy, right? So all I could say is thank you, whoever did that. You know, I don't want everybody to think that, you know, my whole life has all been a series of great miracles. Everything's doing one. I've done my share of suffering. Trust me.
What do they say? Luck is when opportunity meets preparation, or preparation meets opportunity, or whichever way it is. You got to be ready to jump when you can.
You got to be ready, but you have to be ready to take opportunities when they come, or you almost can't really give advice for something like that. How do you get a song on a Stallone soundtrack? Hope he walks by your room? It's like, you know, because I know for years I had publishers who you have sending things out, or say they're sending things out and doing all this stuff, and nothing happens from that. Meanwhile, I'm on, I don't know how many soundtracks. I'd say probably every single one has been from some kind of chance meeting, somebody walking by a studio, a director calling me about that, somebody seeing that by accident, and all major things. It's crazy how it works.
You've had some other great soundtrack songs, one from your time working with the Ramones on Pet Sematary.
Yes, yes.
You also co-wrote the song Something to Believe In, and my old guitarist Jamie is a massive Ramones fan, like a huge Ramones fan, and I believe that's one of his favorite Ramones songs.
Oh, that's good. Tell him thank you.
But you also co-wrote with Desmond Child on the theme tune for Shocker, which would see Paul coming back into the fold to sing with Desmond. Was that another chance thing, or?
Absolutely. Perfect. Matter of fact, taking back a little bit of what I said a minute ago, because this is the one time the publisher at the time, actually, Desmond and I were both in EMI. We were both signed by the same publisher. We just happened to be in those offices. I was visiting, I think it was Jody Gerson, who's one of the heads, and he was visiting her too. So we say a lot of different people walking around. All of a sudden, Pat Lucas, who walks over and says, or one of them said to me, we need a lead song for Shocker. You guys are here. Why don't you go write it?
Right place at right time.
That's it. And we said, you got a piano? And we literally went to the other room, went to the piano, and wrote the song.
Wow. Who put that supergroup together, though?
It was done mostly by Desmond, and Paul came in. And after then, that's it. But everybody was in there. Tommy played drums, and, you know, it was like all kinds of great people on that record.
Didn't I read that Michael Anthony and Kane Roberts were on backing vocals?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's like it's a pretty action-packed record. One of those choice things that band just did that, and then that was it.
Very cool. One thing I wondered, whilst you were doing all this stuff with your solo records and all this kind of thing, did you ever get the opportunity to tour those albums? Did you get any offers for KISS to come and open, or was it just tough to commit to long touring plans with production and songwriting?
I did do some touring. I have to probably blame some of it on myself. You know, at the beginning, I did tour with the Eurythmics, you know, through the US off my solo record, for example. That was great. That was a great tour, you know, and that was right at the release of the solo record and everything. And I was supposed to do all of Europe too. But there was some band drama. The tour was just a couple of weeks away. And finally, I had it. And I just said, now I think in retrospect, you're an asshole. I should have done it, you know, but at the time you're like.
But that's band drama 101, isn't it? Like 2 months down the line, it's like, what was we arguing about that time?
Exactly. That's right. And it wasn't me. It was like, you know, some internal thing, some love affairs going on. And, you know, it was actually connected to Rhythmics too. It was getting a little hot. Let's put it that way. So I was like, you know what? I'd rather go back to Sweden and go chase Swedish girls. It's like, it's a joke, but you know what I mean? No, it's not a joke, but you know what I mean? Instead of like dealing with that. And then now you think about it, it's just funny in life how years later you go, I should have taken that too. I should have taken that movie. I should have done this. What was I thinking?
We'll do that. We'll do that. It's crazy. I mean, it's been an amazing career, which is still continuing. And it's great to see you doing the stuff with all the K-pop stuff and all that. You're embracing all that. And it's so cool.
You know, like I said, I'm writing my book now, which will come out next year. And it'll be a memoirs book. And at the same time, I'm going to start recording again. I'm sitting here in my studio as we speak. And, got my new microphones up and ready. Been testing stuff, getting ready to continue. And I'll just keep going until I can.
Wicked. Well, I look forward to seeing you back in Nottingham.
Me too. I look forward to being back there. We'll have a beer.
Many thanks to Jean Beauvoir for totally living up to his legend status here on the Straight to Video podcast. I hope you all enjoyed that chat and the great journey he's had and continues to be on. Who knows where his path will lead next? To keep up to date, make sure to visit jeanbeauvoir.com, and if you want to dive into previous episodes of this show, then everything is available online at stvpod.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Please, if you wouldn't mind spending a few seconds to share this show with anyone else who you think would like to listen, as that really is the best way for this show to grow, and I'd really appreciate it. So that's all for this episode. I hope you're all doing great and keeping well, and I look forward to chatting with you all again real soon.